From a man who could not tell Cheerios from alphabets, to a man who was clinically declared too stupid to raise his own children, to a man who fought a giant chicken over an expired coupon and destroyed half a city and walked away without a scratch. Peter Griffin is not just a dumb guy on a cartoon, he is something more specific than that, something more layered than that. Most people who have watched Family Guy their entire lives have only ever seen the surface of what his stupidity actually is. There are 7 levels underneath it. Each one builds on the last, each one is stranger and heavier than the one before it. Welcome to Red Umbrella. Subscribe if you are new. Let's get into it. Level 1. The cheerful ignorance. He doesn't know what he doesn't know. Peter Griffin has been on television since 1999. That is over 25 years of one man doing incredibly stupid things in front of millions of people. And in all that time, across all those seasons, through all the chaos and the damage and the debates about whether the show got worse, there is something that almost never gets talked about properly. Peter Griffin's stupidity is not one thing. Most people treat it like it is. They watch Peter do something ridiculous, they laugh or they groan depending on what era of the show they grew up with, and they file it away under the same general category: dumb guy. Funny dumb guy. Dumb guy who gets worse every season. That is the surface reading, and it is not wrong exactly, but it is massively incomplete. Because if you actually watch the show carefully, from the pilot all the way through, what you find is that Peter's stupidity has layers, distinct ones. Each one sits on top of the last. Each one is doing something different, and the show that Family Guy became over 25 seasons is almost entirely explained by which layer was dominant at any given time. There are 7 of them. This first one is the most important to understand because everything else grows out of it. And it is also, genuinely, the one that made people fall in love with the show in the first place. Peter Griffin in season 1 is not a bad person. That point matters more than it might seem, and it will matter a lot more by the time this essay reaches level 4. But right now, in the early seasons, Peter is something very specific. He is a man who is completely, totally, 100% unaware of the gap between who he thinks he is and who he actually is. That gap is enormous. But Peter does not experience the gap. He cannot see it. There is no internal voice telling him that he got something wrong. No moment of quiet doubt. No flicker of anything behind the eyes. When Peter Griffin looks in the mirror, he sees a man who has things figured out. A man with a plan. A man who understands the world around him and moves through it with confidence. The world around him does not agree. The world around him is constantly sending back signals that say something has gone badly wrong. And Peter receives none of them. That is level 1. That is the cheerful ignorance. Not stupidity in a mean way. Not stupidity that wants anything bad to happen. Just a man walking through life with absolute confidence in a version of himself and his surroundings that does not match reality in any measurable way. And because he cannot see the gap, he is never bothered by it. He is almost always in a very good mood. The very first episode of Family Guy, season 1, episode 1, is called Death Has a Shadow. In it, Peter shows up to work drunk, gets fired, and then files for unemployment. The way Peter files for unemployment is to call the government, explain that he was let go from his job, and then describe the circumstances in a way that is both completely honest and completely self-defeating. He does not understand that there is a right and a wrong way to describe what happened. He does not understand that the words he chooses have consequences. He just says what happened, in the order it happened, with no awareness that any of it reflects badly on him. This leads to Peter receiving $6,000 a week in unemployment benefits due to a government computer error. He spends all of it before Lois finds out. He buys $6,000 worth of chicken fajitas, among other things. The important detail is not the money or the fajitas. The important detail is why it happened in the first place. Peter did not scheme. Peter did not lie cleverly. Peter did not manipulate anything. He just described reality the way he experienced it, with no filter and no awareness that his description was going to cause problems. The government computer made an error on top of that, and things spiraled. But the starting point is a man who genuinely did not know that what he was saying was going to land the way it landed. That is cheerful ignorance in its purest form. No malice, no awareness, just a man reporting his experience with total confidence and zero judgment. There is a scene from season 1 that does not get talked about nearly enough. Peter is sitting at the kitchen table. He is staring at his cereal. He is genuinely confused. He calls Brian over and explains that his alphabet cereal has spelled out a message. The message is a long string of the letter O. Peter shows Brian the bowl with the expression of a man who has stumbled onto something significant. Brian looks at the bowl. Brian looks at Peter. Brian says those are Cheerios. Peter's face does not change. That exchange is maybe 15 seconds long. It does not drive a plot. It does not set up a callback. It just exists as a small, perfect demonstration of what level 1 stupidity actually looks like up close. Peter was not pretending. He was not confused because something complicated happened. He looked at a bowl of round cereal, decided it was alphabet cereal that had arranged itself into a message, and he was ready to discuss what the message meant. The conclusion he had already reached in his head was so solid that Brian's correction did not even visibly land. His face stayed the same. He was unbothered. He moved on. That is the texture of this level. The world corrects Peter constantly. Peter does not update. Season 1, Episode 2 is called I Never Met the Dead Man. Peter is driving and gets distracted. He crashes his car into Quahog's main television satellite dish and knocks out television for the entire town. Every house in Quahog loses TV. Peter's reaction to this is relief. He tells Lois that maybe this is a good thing, that the family will spend more time together now, that maybe losing TV will bring them closer. He means this. He is genuinely optimistic about the situation he caused. The show does not linger on the fact that he just destroyed something the entire town relied on. Peter has already moved past it in his mind, because in his mind he did not do something wrong. He did something that led to an unexpected outcome, and now he is looking for the bright side. The inability to register that he caused a problem is not denial. Denial requires knowing what you are denying. Peter simply does not have that awareness available to him. The episode then does something interesting with this. Because Peter loses access to TV, he starts spending time outside, meets a new neighbor, and briefly becomes something like a functioning member of his community. His cheerful ignorance of the damage he caused accidentally produces a positive result. That pattern shows up constantly in the early seasons. Peter does something that should be catastrophic. His complete inability to process it as catastrophic means he just keeps moving forward. And sometimes moving forward accidentally works out. The cheerful ignorance is not just funny. In the early seasons, it is also, oddly, a survival mechanism. Season 2, Episode 20, Wasted Talent, is one of the most loved episodes in the show's entire run, and it is built entirely on Peter's cheerful ignorance operating at full power. The setup is that Pawtucket Pat, the owner of Peter's favorite beer brand, has hidden silver scrolls inside random bottles. Finding a scroll gets you a tour of the brewery. Peter's response to this news is to drink enormous amounts of beer every single day until he finds one. This is not a plan born out of desperation. Peter does not experience the contest as a long shot. He experiences it as a reasonable thing to do. Drinking more beer than usual to find a prize in the bottle is, to Peter, a perfectly sensible activity. He does it at 7 in the morning. He does it after Lois tells him to stop. He does it with the calm focus of someone who has thought this through and decided it makes sense. When Lois catches him drinking at 6 in the morning and tells him he is drunk again, Peter's response is that he is not drunk. He is just exhausted because he has been up all night drinking. That line gets a laugh every time it gets quoted. But underneath the laugh, there is something very specific happening. Peter is not being sarcastic. He genuinely believes there is a meaningful difference between being drunk and being tired from a night of drinking. In his mind, those are two different things, and he has explained himself clearly. The distinction makes total sense to him. The fact that it makes no sense to Lois is not something he is equipped to process. He also delivers one of the most accidentally honest lines in the show's history during this episode. When Brian asks him why he cares so much about touring a brewery, Peter says, "Everyone has their sanctuary. The Catholics have churches, fat people have Wisconsin, and Peter has the Pawtucket Brewery." He says this with complete seriousness. He is not joking. He is drawing a genuine comparison between a religious institution, a geographic location he associates with a group of people he finds comforting, and a beer factory. The comparison makes perfect sense to him. He has thought about where people find peace and meaning, and he has arrived at an answer, and the answer involves a brewery. The cheerful ignorance is right there in that sentence. Not stupidity about facts. Stupidity about how things relate to each other, about what comparisons are appropriate, about what a sentence like that sounds like coming out of a person's mouth. What makes the Wasted Talent episode especially good for understanding level 1 is what happens after Peter finds the scroll and gets banned from the tour for breaking the rules. He and Brian steal some experimental beer that is not supposed to be consumed yet, float to the ceiling, and have to fart repeatedly to get back down. Pawtucket Pat throws them out. Peter's response is to ask, on the way out, if they can stay for one more Chumbawamba song. He was just ejected from the place he cared most about seeing. His response is to ask for more entertainment. There is no shame, there is no self-reflection, there is just a man who enjoyed the song and would like to hear it again. That is the emotional signature of level 1 across the board. Peter moves through consequences the way water moves around a rock. The consequence happens. Peter is already past it, not because he is tough or resilient in any meaningful way, because the consequence never registered as a consequence in the first place. Seth MacFarlane has said in interviews that Peter Griffin was inspired by a specific type of New England man he grew up around. Men who said exactly what they thought with no filter, no awareness of how it landed, and no particular guilt about any of it afterward. That description maps perfectly onto level 1. The cheerful ignorance is not a writing invention. It is a portrait of a real kind of person that MacFarlane observed and then turned up to cartoon volume. The specific accent, the specific confidence, the specific way Peter states things that no reasonable person would state with that level of certainty, all of it comes from that observation. Peter is not a random idiot. He is a very specific kind of idiot, drawn from a very specific place. That That specificity is why the early seasons landed as well as they did. Audiences could recognize something in Peter even while laughing at him. He was not a character designed purely to be mocked. He was a character designed to be familiar. Most people have met a Peter Griffin, maybe not at his cartoon volume, but in the general shape of him. The man who is absolutely certain about things he has no business being certain about. The man whose confidence never seems to take damage no matter how wrong he turns out to be. The man who describes reality with total authority and then looks mildly puzzled when reality does not cooperate. That man exists in real life. Peter Griffin is just what happens when you take that man and remove every external constraint that would normally keep him in check. The early seasons keep just enough of those constraints in place to make Peter feel grounded. Lois pushes back. Brian pushes back. The consequences of his actions occasionally catch up with him by the end of the episode. He usually learns something, or at least appears to. The cheerful ignorance has edges in Season 1 and Season 2 and Season 3 that the show is willing to show. Peter is wrong. Peter gets told he is wrong. Peter sort of absorbs that information before the credits roll. The world has not fully given up on correcting him yet, and Peter has not fully given up on being corrected. That changes. The show changes with it. But in the early seasons, what the cheerful ignorance produces is something that feels genuinely warm. A man this certain about this many wrong things should be exhausting to watch. In the golden era of Family Guy, he is somehow not. He is watchable because the ignorance has no edge to it. There is no cruelty underneath it. There is just a person who experiences reality differently than everyone around him, and who does so with such complete and total comfort that watching him almost feels peaceful. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That feeling is going to become a lot harder to access. The second level of Peter's stupidity is where the cheerful ignorance starts doing real damage. Not because Peter changes, but because the show starts putting him in situations where not being able to read a room has actual consequences for the people around him. Peter does not develop a filter in Level 2. The world just stops being patient about the fact that he does not have one. Level 2, the social stupidity. The man with no filter and no idea that filters exist. There is a specific kind of person most people have encountered at some point in their lives. The person at a dinner table who says the thing nobody else was going to say. Not because they are brave. Not because they have thought about it carefully and decided the truth needs to be spoken. They say it because the thought arrived in their head and then immediately came out of their mouth. And the step in between, the part where a normal person would think about how this is going to land, simply did not happen. The room goes quiet, everyone stares, the person who said it looks around at the quiet room and genuinely cannot figure out what just happened. That person is Peter Griffin at Level 2. Level 1 was about Peter not knowing things. Not knowing that Cheerios are not alphabets. Not knowing that crashing into a satellite dish is a problem. Not knowing that drinking yourself unconscious every morning to find a prize in a beer bottle is not a standard approach to a contest. Level 1 stupidity is about information. Peter simply does not have the information that would allow him to see his situation clearly. Level 2 is different. Level 2 is not about missing information. Level 2 is about missing the part of the brain that processes other people. The part that registers how someone else is feeling. The part that reads a room before speaking in it. The part that takes in the faces around you and adjusts accordingly. Peter does not have that part working at any reliable capacity. He can look directly at a person who is upset and feel nothing that would cause him to change what he is about to do. He can say something that lands terribly, watch it land terribly, and then say the follow-up thought that makes it worse. Because the follow-up thought arrived and there was nothing stopping it. What makes Level 2 so important to understand is that this is where Peter starts affecting other people in ways that have nothing to do with accidents or bad luck. In Level 1, Peter causes damage because he does not know things. In Level 2, Peter causes damage because he cannot read the people around him well enough to stop himself before the damage happens. The distinction matters because it means the harm in Level 2 is, in a specific way, more personal. The satellite dish was a car accident. The things Peter says to people at Level 2 are aimed directly at them, even when he has no idea that is what he is doing. Season 2, Episode 8 is called I Am Peter, Hear Me Roar. It is the clearest possible demonstration of Level 2 in the entire show's run. The episode begins with Peter at work telling a joke. The joke is sexist. Peter does not know the joke is sexist. That is not a defense of the joke. It is just an accurate description of where Peter is standing when he tells it. He tells the joke the way a person tells a joke they heard somewhere and thought was funny, with no consideration of who is in the room, no awareness of how the people around him are going to receive it, and no preparation for the reaction that follows. His coworker Angela, his boss, does not find it funny. She does not find it remotely appropriate. Peter is disciplined. As part of his discipline, he is made to attend a women's retreat, a weekend event designed to help him understand why what he said was harmful, and to give him some awareness of experiences different from his own. Peter goes, and something genuinely interesting happens at the retreat. Peter actually connects with some of what he hears. He comes back changed, or at least appearing changed. He starts using using different language. He starts talking about his feelings. He starts pushing back on Lois when he thinks she is being dismissive of his emotional needs, which is a direct result of what he learned at the retreat. This lasts approximately one episode. By the end of I Am Peter, Hear Me Roar, Peter has fully reverted. He is back to exactly who he was before the retreat. The lesson did not stick. And the reason the lesson did not stick is not that Peter is malicious or that he decided to ignore what he learned. The reason is structural. The social wiring that would allow him to hold on to that kind of awareness and apply it going forward is not there. He absorbed the information at the retreat the way he absorbs most information, briefly and without it changing anything fundamental. The world told Peter something about himself. Peter could not hold on to it. That is level 2 in its most complete form. The Family Feud scene is one of the most perfectly constructed demonstrations of social stupidity in the show's history. Peter and his family are on the game show Family Feud. Lois has just played the first round and scored 199 points out of a possible 200. She needs one more point from Peter's round to win $5,000 for the family. The host asks Peter the first question. The question is, name something you sit in. Peter answers, chair. The host tells him that chair has already been given as an answer by Lois. Peter needs a different answer. Peter answers, big chair. The host tells him that is not a valid different answer. Peter answers, little chair. The host tells him to move on to the next question or pass. Peter asks how to pass. The host tells him to say pass. Several seconds go by. Peter asks what he should do if he cannot think of anything. The host tells him he can pass. Peter asks how to pass again. The host tells him again. Peter eventually moves through the round without scoring a single point, despite having the easiest possible question to open with. The family loses the game. What makes this scene work as a piece of social stupidity analysis is not that Peter cannot think of answers. It is that Peter cannot read the host. He cannot read the room. He cannot pick up on the rapidly increasing frustration of the man standing in front of him. A normal person in that situation, even a not particularly smart normal person, would register the host's face and the tone of his voice and understand that the conversation needs to move forward. Peter registers none of it. He is having a totally internal experience of trying to solve the problem in front of him, and the social context, the host, the audience, the game show format, the fact that other people are watching and waiting, none of it exists for him in that moment. He is just a man trying to think of something you sit in. Seth MacFarlane has described Peter Griffin as being based on a specific type of New England man, a man who speaks without any filter, a man who says exactly what is in his head at the exact moment it is in his head. MacFarlane has said this type of man is something he observed growing up, and that Peter is a cartoon version of that specific social pattern. That context matters because it means level 2 is not random. It is a portrait of something real. The social stupidity is not just a comedy device. It is an observation about a specific kind of person who exists in the world. A person who is not cruel but whose complete inability to read other people produces effects that are difficult to separate from cruelty in their impact. The distinction MacFarlane seems to be drawing, at least in the early seasons, is between intent and effect. Peter never intends the social damage he causes. He is not calculating. He is not trying to hurt anyone. He just says what he thinks, does what he wants, and moves on. The damage happens anyway, and in the early seasons, the show is genuinely interested in that gap, the gap between what Peter means and what Peter does, as a source of comedy that also says something about a real type of human being. Season 3, episode 14 is called Peter Griffin, Husband, Father, Brother. In this episode, Peter discovers that one of his ancestors was a black man. This discovery sends Peter through a rapid series of reactions and behaviors that are all driven by the same basic social blindness. He starts speaking differently. He starts listening to different music. He starts trying to connect with the black community in Quahog in ways that are embarrassing because they are all surface level and none of them are informed by any actual understanding of the people he is trying to connect with. He is not doing this out of mockery. He is doing this because he found out something new about himself and his social processing is so limited that the only response he has available is to change his external behavior based on stereotypes he has absorbed from culture around him. The episode is uncomfortable in specific ways that are worth sitting with. Peter is not performing racism in the traditional sense. He is not trying to demean anyone. He is trying to connect with a part of himself he just discovered, and the way he goes about it reveals that his social understanding of race, of culture, of what it means to identify with a group of people is operating at the most shallow possible level. He cannot read the room on this. He cannot tell when the people around him are uncomfortable. He cannot adjust. He just keeps going, with complete sincerity doing the thing he has decided makes sense. That sincerity is the key to understanding why level 2 is so specifically uncomfortable in a way that level 1 is not. Level 1 stupidity is easy to laugh at because it is abstract. Peter does not know his cereal is Cheerios. That does not hurt anyone. Level 2 stupidity is aimed at people. It lands on people. It makes specific people feel specific things, and Peter cannot tell that it is happening. The social blindness is not passive the way the cheerful ignorance is passive. It is active in the sense that it is constantly pointed outward. wired, constantly making contact with the world, and constantly producing effects that Peter is not aware of producing. There is a pattern across the early seasons where Lois functions as the person who catches Peter's social stupidity before it fully detonates. She pulls him aside. She explains what he just did. She translates the reaction of the room into language Peter can understand. This is an important structural role because it means the show, in the early seasons, has a mechanism for at least acknowledging that the social stupidity causes damage. Lois sees it. Lois names it. The show does not pretend it did not happen. The degree to which that acknowledgement fades in later seasons is one of the clearest ways to track how the show's relationship with Peter's behavior changes over time. But in the early seasons, it is present, and it matters. Brian plays a similar role. Brian is often the one sitting next to Peter when the social stupidity fires, and Brian's reactions, the exhausted look, the flat correction, the complete inability to believe what he just heard, function as the show's way of confirming that what Peter just did or said was not okay. The Cheerios scene works partly because of Brian's reaction. The reaction validates what the audience is feeling. It says, yes, what you just witnessed was as strange as you thought it was. Brian's presence as a witness to Peter's social stupidity is one of the early show's most reliable tools, and it works because Brian's intelligence and social awareness are so much higher than Peter's that the gap between them is always visible. Season 2, Episode 20, Wasted Talent, contains a small moment that is easy to miss but sits right at the edge between Level 1 and Level 2. Peter has been drinking heavily to find the silver scroll. Lois has told him multiple times to stop. Peter shows up at the door after a night of drinking, and when Lois opens the door, he says, "Thank God it's her," because the last 3 houses he went to were very rude. He has been going to the wrong house multiple times, knocking on neighbors' doors in the middle of the night, drunk, looking for his own home. And his interpretation of the situation is that the neighbors were rude, not that he was doing something that reasonably upset them. Not that showing up drunk at a stranger's door at night is a problem. The neighbors were rude. That reading of the situation, where Peter is the one who was wronged by people reacting badly to his behavior, is exactly how Level 2 stupidity operates. He cannot read the situation from outside himself. He can only read it from inside himself, and from inside himself he did nothing wrong. What the show is doing with Level 2 across the early seasons is using it as a way to talk about a specific kind of social blindness that is very common in real life and almost never examined directly. Most social comedy is about people who know they are doing something wrong and do it anyway. Peter is doing something different. He does not know. He genuinely does not know. And the show, in its best early season moments, uses that genuine not knowing to create comedy that has a real observation underneath it. The observation is that a person can move through the world causing real social damage without ever meaning to, without ever knowing they are doing it, and without the damage ever registering in their own experience of events. That observation has a sharp edge to it that gets mostly lost when people describe Family Guy as just a shock comedy show. The social stupidity done well is not shock comedy. It is character comedy built on a very specific and accurate portrait of a type of person. The shock comes later, at higher levels, when the show stops being interested in the portrait and starts being interested in how far it can push. But at Level 2, in the seasons where the show is doing this well, the social stupidity is sharp and specific and rooted in something true. There is also something worth noting about how Peter's social stupidity affects his children in the early seasons, and specifically how it affects Meg. In the early seasons, Peter's obliviousness to Meg's social struggles is not malicious. He does not understand what she is going through at school. He does not understand what it feels like to be her. When he says things to her that land badly, it is because he cannot read her face or her tone or the situation she is in. He is not targeting her. He is just being Peter, which means moving through every social situation without any of the basic tools that would tell him when to stop. Meg is collateral damage in Level 2 the same way the satellite dish was collateral damage in Level 1. She gets hurt not because Peter wants to hurt her, but because Peter cannot see her clearly enough to avoid hurting her. That is going to change. The relationship between Peter and Meg is one of the most important threads to track across all 7 levels because it changes so dramatically, and the change tells you almost everything you need to know about how the show itself changed. In Level 2, Peter cannot read Meg. In later levels, Peter can read Meg perfectly well and chooses not to care what he reads. That is a fundamental difference, and it sits at the heart of the conversation about what kind of show Family Guy actually is. The social stupidity also does something interesting with Peter's friendships. Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe are Peter's closest friends throughout the show's run. The way Peter treats them in the early seasons is revealing. He is not a bad friend in a deliberate sense. He forgets things. He says things that are socially off. He misreads situations constantly. But the friendships survive because Quagmire and Cleveland and Joe have all developed a working relationship with Peter's social limitations. They have calibrated their expectations. They do not expect Peter to read the room. They have stopped waiting for it. And in that adjustment, in the way his friends have quietly accepted that Peter will always be exactly this way, there is something both funny and a little sad. bad. Peter does not know his friends have made that adjustment. He thinks everything is fine because from inside his experience of the friendship, everything is fine. That dynamic, the people around Peter quietly absorbing and adjusting and managing, is one of the most consistent things in the early show. Lois does it, Brian does it, his friends do it. The whole supporting structure around Peter is a group of people who have, in different ways and to different degrees, made peace with the fact that Peter will never reliably read a social situation correctly. The show finds the comedy in that acceptance, but it also, in its quieter moments, finds something accurate in it, because that adjustment is something a lot of people in real life make for the Peters in their lives. They lower the expectation, they stop being surprised, they absorb the social damage and move on, because that is the only available option. Level 2 is where the show first starts asking a question that it will keep returning to across all 7 levels. A question it never fully answers but keeps circling. The question is whether Peter's inability to see other people as clearly as he sees himself is something that can be fixed, or whether it is simply the permanent shape of him. The women's retreat in I Am Peter Hear Me Roar suggests it can be fixed, briefly, and then shows that the fix does not hold. That structure, Peter briefly getting something right and then losing it, is the early show's honest answer to the question. The answer is that the social stupidity is not going away. It can be suppressed for an episode. The underlying wiring does not change. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Understanding that is important for everything that follows. Because the next level of Peter's stupidity does not replace the social stupidity. It builds on top of it. A man who cannot read other people and a man who acts on every impulse the moment it arrives is a specific and increasingly volatile combination. Level 3 is where those impulses start becoming the engine that drives everything Peter does, and where the show starts discovering just how much story you can generate from a person who has never once in his life paused between a thought and an action. Level 3, the impulsive stupidity. He thought of it and then he did it. Most people, when a thought arrives in their head, do something with it before acting on it. They turn it over. They consider it from a few angles. They ask themselves whether it is a good idea, whether the timing is right, whether the people around them are going to be okay with what they are about to do. This process happens quickly for most people. Sometimes it takes half a second. Sometimes it takes longer. But it happens. There is a gap between the thought and the action, and inside that gap is where judgment lives. Peter Griffin does not have that gap. This is level 3, and it is different from the first 2 levels in a way that matters. Level 1 was about missing information. Peter does not know things that would help him understand his situation. Level 2 was about missing social awareness. Peter cannot read the people around him or pick up on how his words and actions are landing. Both of those levels are about something being absent in Peter. Level 3 is about something being present. There is an engine running inside Peter Griffin at all times, and that engine takes every thought, every desire, every passing idea, and immediately converts it into action. The thought arrives, the action follows. Nothing happens in between. That engine is what makes Peter genuinely dangerous in a way that the first 2 levels do not fully prepare you for. A person who does not know things can be managed. A person who cannot read a room can be steered around social situations with some effort. A person who acts on every single impulse the moment it arrives cannot be managed or steered. By the time the people around him realize what is happening, Peter has already done it. The impulse fired. The action is in progress. The consequences are on their way. Season 2, Episode 18 is called E. Peterbus Unum. The plot begins with Peter trying to get a permit to build a swimming pool in his backyard. During the permit process, a government survey reveals that due to a historical mapping error, Peter's property was never technically incorporated into the United States. His house exists in a small patch of land that belongs to no country. A normal person discovering this would probably find it mildly interesting, maybe mention it to a few people, possibly look into what it means legally. Peter's response is immediate and total. He declares his property its own sovereign nation. He names it Pretoria. He prints a flag. He sets up border controls. He does all of this in what appears to be a single afternoon. There is no planning phase in the episode. There is no scene where Peter sits down and thinks through whether declaring his house a country is a good idea. The thought arrived, which was that if his property is not part of America, then it must be its own country, and the action followed, which was to make it a country. The gap that would have allowed him to consider whether this was wise simply did not exist. And then, because the impulsive engine does not stop running just because the first impulse has already been acted on, Peter immediately starts making decisions as the leader of Pretoria. He applies for membership in the United Nations. He invades Joe's pool because he decides Pretoria needs access to water. He does not stop at declaring the country. Each new thought produces a new action, immediately, with no pause between them. The invasion of Joe's pool is worth looking at closely because it is such a clean example of how the impulsive stupidity escalates. Peter did not arrive at the idea of declaring his house a country with a plan to eventually take Joe's pool. He arrived at declaring his house a country, and then the thought arrived that a country needs water access, and then the action arrived that that Joe's pool was right there, and then Pretoria had annexed the pool. Each step felt logical to Peter at the exact moment he took it, because each step was the direct result of the thought that had just fired. He was not thinking 3 steps ahead. He was not thinking 1 step ahead. He was acting on the current thought and then immediately receiving the next thought and acting on that. The chain of impulses is what creates the story, and none of the links in the chain were planned. This is what Family Guy figured out about Peter as a narrative engine very early in the show's run. If you give Peter a starting condition, he will generate story automatically. All the writers have to do is hand him a situation and then follow the chain of impulses as they fire one after another. Peterbus unum is almost a textbook example of this approach. The starting condition is that Peter's house is not technically in America. Everything that follows, the declaration of nationhood, the UN application, the pool invasion, the diplomatic standoff, is just the impulsive engine running without a break. The episode does not need a villain. It does not need an external problem. Peter's own inability to pause between thoughts is the entire plot. The diplomatic standoff section of Peterbus unum deserves its own attention, because it shows how the impulsive stupidity compounds itself when it runs long enough without interruption. After Peter declares Pretoria and annexes Joe's pool, the United States government gets involved. They freeze Pretoria's assets. They apply pressure. Other nations refuse to recognize Pretoria as a legitimate country. A normal person in this situation would recognize that the situation has escalated beyond what was intended and find a way to walk it back. Peter does not walk things back. Walking back requires the ability to look at a chain of actions and evaluate the chain as a whole. Peter can only ever see the current link. The current link says he is a world leader under pressure from the United States. The action that follows from that thought is to hold his ground. He holds his ground. The situation gets worse. The impulsive engine keeps running. Season 3, episode 10 is called A Fish Out of Water. Peter has been working as a fisherman. He has 2 Portuguese fishing assistants named Santos and Pascoal, who do most of the actual work. In an attempt to save money, Peter fires them. This is the first impulse. It feels logical to Peter at the moment. He wants to save money, the assistants cost money, so he fires them. The thought arrived and the action followed. What comes next is a perfect chain of subsequent impulses, all building on that first one. Peter decides, having fired his assistants, that he will fish alone. The thought arrives that if he fishes in a different location, he might find more fish. The thought arrives that a hurricane warning in the area should not stop him because the fish will still be there. He goes out alone into dangerous water with his friends Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland, gets caught in the hurricane, and the group ends up stranded on a desert island. No single step in that chain is crazy in isolation. Wanting to save money makes sense. Deciding to fish without assistance makes sense as a follow-on to that. Going out on the water makes sense as a follow-on to that. The problem is that at no point does Peter stop and look at the full chain of what he is doing. He is always only looking at the current thought, and because he is always only looking at the current thought, he never sees that the chain of thoughts he is following is leading him toward getting stranded on a desert island. Each impulse feels right. The accumulated result of all the impulses is a disaster. The desert island section of the episode is also interesting because of what Peter does once he is there. Stranded on an island with no food, Peter's approach is not to think through a survival strategy. It is to act on whatever arrives. He survives, according to the episode, by eating legs. The show does not specify further. It is a deeply strange detail delivered completely straight. Peter ate legs on the island. The impulse to survive fired. The action that followed was eating legs. The logic between those two things is not examined because Peter does not examine things. He just acts. What the desert island sequence also demonstrates is how the people around Peter experience the impulsive stupidity differently from how Peter experiences it. For Peter, the trip to the island is just a series of present tense moments. He fired the assistants. He decided to fish alone. He went out in the hurricane. Each of those moments felt like the right thing at the time. He is not distressed about the chain. He is just responding to whatever is in front of him. For Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe, the experience is completely different. They are on a desert island. They did not independently decide to be there. They followed Peter, and Peter followed his impulses, and the island is where that led. The gap between Peter's experience of his own decision-making and his friend's experience of being caught in it is one of the most consistent and revealing dynamics in the early show. Season 4, Episode 6, Petarded, has already appeared in this essay in the context of Level 1 setup, but it belongs even more to Level 3 because the episode is almost entirely constructed around a single impulsive chain. The episode begins with a Trivial Pursuit game. Lois has secretly replaced Peter's question cards with cards from the preschool version of the game. Peter gets all his questions right. The thought immediately arrives that he must be a genius. Brian, tired of Peter's sudden arrogance, challenges him to take the MacArthur Fellows Program Test, which is a real test used to identify genuine intellectual talent. Peter agrees immediately. The thought arrived that taking the test was a good way to prove he was a genius. The action followed. When the test results come back and show that Peter is not just not a genius, but has an IQ low enough to be classified as mentally disabled, disabled, Peter is briefly upset, and then the impulse engine starts running again. Peter discovers accidentally that being classified as mentally disabled means people are more forgiving of his behavior. He runs over Tom Tucker with his car. Tucker, who is initially furious, sees that it is Peter, the disabled man, and lets it go. Peter processes this information immediately and completely. The thought arrives, if people forgive me for things because I am disabled, then I can do whatever I want. The action follows. He starts doing whatever he wants. He kicks open doors in the women's restroom. He announces to a restaurant full of people that he is disabled. He uses the classification as a reason to get away with anything that occurs to him. None of this is planned in advance. None of it is strategic in the way that a genuinely calculating person would be strategic. Each action is just the most recent impulse firing. Peter sees a women's restroom and the thought arrives that he could go in and the classification would protect him, and then he does it. He sees a situation where he wants something and the thought arrives that being disabled means he can take it, and then he takes it. The impulse engine runs on the new information the same way it always runs. New information arrives. Impulse fires, action follows. The scene where Peter hires a bulldozer with a drunk driver to knock down half his house is one of the most extreme examples of the impulsive stupidity in the show's history. Peter receives what he believes are genius-level test results. He has had those results for less than a minute. The thought arrives that he should celebrate. The thought arrives that a big celebration requires something dramatic. The thought arrives that a bulldozer would be dramatic. He hires a bulldozer with a drunk driver to demolish part of his house. He has had the test results for approximately 45 seconds. The house starts coming down before he has had time to think about what he is doing, and by the time Brian points out what is actually on the test results, and Peter understands that he is not a genius, the bulldozer is already through a wall. That sequence is a near-perfect encapsulation of level 3 in miniature. Thought arrives, action follows, consequences arrive. Peter is already surprised by the consequences because by the time they arrive, he has moved on from the thought that produced them. The house being knocked down is genuinely shocking to him, even though he is the one who hired the bulldozer. The impulse fired, the action happened. He was already somewhere else in his head when the wall came down. The rope and Brian scene operates on the same principle, but in a much smaller and quieter way that makes it almost more revealing. Brian is chewing on a rope as dogs do. Peter wants to get the rope away from Brian. The thought arrives that if he ties the other end of the rope to his car and drives away, Brian will either let go or be pulled away from the rope. Peter ties the rope to his car. He drives. Brian, still chewing, gets dragged. Peter drives faster. Brian gets dragged faster. Peter does not stop to reassess the situation because the impulse to get the rope away from Brian was the only thought present, and he is still acting on it. The situation escalates until something bad happens. What this smaller scene reveals is that the impulsive stupidity does not require a big plot to operate. It does not need a sovereign nation or a hurricane or a test result. It can fire on the smallest possible trigger, a dog chewing a rope, and produce immediate chaos with the same basic mechanism. The thought arrives, the action follows. The gap where someone would normally think about what they are doing simply does not exist, regardless of the size or significance of the situation. A nation and a rope are the same to the impulsive engine. Both are just the current thought. Both get the same immediate response. There is something important to understand about how the impulsive stupidity interacts with Peter's size and physical presence. Peter Griffin is a large man. He is described across the show as being around 6 feet tall and over 270 pounds. When Peter acts on an impulse, the action lands with the full weight of that physical presence. He does not impulsively say something. He impulsively does things. He builds things, breaks things, goes places, takes objects, starts enterprises. The impulse engine in a large physical man who can actually execute on whatever the impulse produces is a different kind of problem than it would be in someone who had the same inner experience but lacked the physical ability to act on it immediately. The show uses this physical reality throughout the early seasons. Peter's impulsive stupidity is funny, partly because he can always actually do the thing. He does not just think about declaring his house a country. He makes a flag. He prints documents. He sets up a border. He has the energy and the physical ability to immediately execute on every impulse, and that execution is always happening at full scale. When Peter decides to do something, it is never half done. The impulse does not produce a half measure. It produces the complete action, fully realized, immediately. That completeness is part of what makes Level 3 so watchable in the early seasons. There is a commitment to Peter's actions that other characters do not have. He is never tentative. He never does something halfway and then reconsiders. Whatever the impulse produces, Peter delivers in full. The friends around Peter, Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe, are interesting to watch in the context of Level 3 because they are frequently the people who get caught in the consequences of Peter's impulses. A fish out of water is a good example of this. Peter's impulse chain ends with all 4 of them stranded on a desert island. Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe did not independently decide to go fishing in hurricane conditions. They were following following Peter, and Peter was following his impulse chain, and by the time the consequences arrived, there were 4 people on a desert island rather than 1. The impulsive stupidity has a radius. It does not just affect Peter, it pulls everyone near him into its consequences. This is one of the ways Level 3 builds on Level 2 in a direct and important way. Level 2 is about Peter's inability to read the social world around him. Level 3 is about Peter acting on his thoughts with no pause. When you combine those two things, what you get is a man who cannot read the people around him, and who acts on every impulse immediately. That means the people around him are constantly in the path of actions they did not see coming and had no way to prepare for. Lois does not know a bulldozer is coming. Joe does not know he is about to get his pool annexed. The impulse fired before anyone had a chance to register that it was building. Season 2, Episode 18 contains a small exchange that sits at the heart of what Level 3 is about. When other countries react to the creation of Pretoria by refusing to recognize it diplomatically, and the United States pressures Peter to dissolve the nation, Peter's response is to hold a press conference from his lawn. He did not plan the press conference. He did not think about whether it would help. The thought arrived that a press conference was what leaders do in situations like this, and the action followed. He stands on his lawn and addresses nobody in particular with the full confidence of a man who has just thought of this and immediately done it. That image, Peter on his lawn addressing an absent crowd at a press conference he called on impulse, is something close to a visual definition of Level 3. The action is completely committed. The reasoning behind it is completely absent. He is not doing a half-hearted thing. He is doing a full and total thing that he did not think about at all. The commitment and the thoughtlessness exist together in equal measure, and that combination is what makes Level 3 feel so specifically Peter. The early seasons are full of this pattern in smaller forms too. Peter decides in the middle of a conversation to change careers. Peter starts a business based on a thought he had while eating. Peter joins a group or a club or a movement because the thought arrived that he should, and then he was already at the first meeting. These smaller versions of Level 3 are sometimes only one scene long, or sometimes just a cutaway gag, but they are all drawing from the same well. The impulse engine does not distinguish between big decisions and small ones. It fires on everything equally. The thought to declare a nation and the thought to join a club arrive through the same mechanism and receive the same immediate response. What is interesting about Level 3 in the context of the show's early seasons is that the writers were clearly aware of how much story it could generate and were leaning into it deliberately. The structure of a huge number of early Family Guy episodes is Peter has a thought, acts on it, the action produces a consequence, the consequence produces a new thought, the new thought produces a new action, and the episode follows that chain until it resolves. E Peterbus Unum is almost a pure example of this structure. A fish out of water is another. Most of the best early episodes have this shape because the impulsive stupidity is the most productive thing about Peter as a character from a pure storytelling standpoint. Give him a situation and the episode writes itself. The impulses do the work. There is also something almost admirable about the impulsive stupidity when it is running at Level 3 before the later levels add darker dimensions to it. Peter acts completely and immediately and without reservation. Most people spend enormous amounts of time not doing things because they are thinking about them too hard. Peter has no such limitation. The thought arrives, and then whatever the thought suggested is happening. There is a kind of freedom in that, even if the freedom produces chaos. And in the early seasons, before the impulses start causing serious harm to the people around him, there is something genuinely funny about watching a person live so entirely in the present tense of whatever just occurred to him. He is never stuck. He is never frozen by uncertainty. The thought arrives and he is already moving. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That changes as the levels stack. The impulse engine keeps running through every level that follows. What changes is the weight of the consequences it produces and how much the people around Peter can absorb before something breaks. Level 4 is where that breaking starts becoming visible and where the damage stops being the kind that gets cleaned up before the credits roll. Section 4, Level 4, the dangerous stupidity, the damage he leaves behind. The first 3 levels of Peter's stupidity share something in common. They are all, in their own way, self-contained. Level 1 is Peter not knowing things. Level 2 is Peter not being able to read people. Level 3 is Peter acting on every thought the moment it arrives. All 3 of those levels produce consequences, and some of those consequences land on other people, but in the early seasons the show maintains a kind of cushion between Peter's stupidity and genuine lasting harm. The satellite dish gets fixed, the unemployment money gets sorted out, the desert island gets escaped, Pretoria gets dissolved, the damage happens, and then the episode ends, and everyone is back to where they started. Level 4 removes that cushion. Level 4 is the point where Peter's stupidity stops being something that produces recoverable situations and starts being something that produces real damage to real people. The people who get hurt at Level 4 are not anonymous townspeople or background characters. They are Lois. They are Meg. They They are the specific human beings who share a house with Peter and depend on him in ways that make his stupidity something they cannot simply walk away from. And what makes level 4 so important to understand is that the damage at this level is still not intentional. Peter is still not trying to hurt anyone. The cheerful ignorance is still running. The social blindness is still running. The impulse engine is still running. All three of the previous levels are active and contributing. Level 4 is just what happens when all of those things operate together in close proximity to people who have no option but to absorb the results. Season 4, Episode 6, Petarded, is the single most important episode for understanding Level 4 because it contains the most concentrated and clearly documented version of dangerous stupidity in the show's history. The episode has already appeared in this essay in the context of the impulsive stupidity, but what happens in the second half of Petarded belongs entirely to Level 4 and needs to be looked at directly. After Peter discovers he is classified as mentally disabled and begins using that classification to get away with things, he decides he wants a deep fryer from a fast food restaurant. The thought arrives that he wants it. The impulse fires. Peter goes to the restaurant and attempts to steal the deep fryer. In the process of attempting this, Peter pours the hot grease from the fryer all over Lois. Lois ends up in the hospital. She is put in a full-body cast. She is there for an extended period. Peter did not plan to pour hot grease on his wife. He was not trying to hurt her. The cheerful ignorance was running, which meant he did not think about what could go wrong. The impulse engine was running, which meant he acted on the thought without pausing. The social blindness was running, which meant he did not read the situation in the restaurant clearly enough to see how dangerous it was. All three previous levels contributed to a moment where Lois ended up in a full-body cast. The show plays this for laughs. The hospital visit is comedic. The full-body cast is a visual gag, but the scaffolding underneath the joke is genuinely grim. A woman was severely burned by her husband's stupidity. She is in a cast that covers her entire body, and because Peter has been classified as mentally disabled, he is also deemed unfit to parent, which means that while Lois is in the hospital, the children are taken away from him by Child Protective Services. Meg, Chris, and Stewie are placed in Cleveland's care. Peter is alone in a house he partially demolished with a bulldozer because of an earlier impulsive decision made in the same episode. The episode resolves, as early Family Guy episodes do, by the end of the running time. Lois recovers fully and walks back in through the door. The children come home. Peter is relieved and everything goes back to normal. But the resolution does not undo the fact that what happened in the middle of the episode was a woman in a full-body cast and 3 children removed from their home. The show can resolve it in under a minute of screen time. The actual event, taken at face value, is serious. Level 4 is the level where that gap between what the show is presenting as funny and what the underlying situation actually involves starts to become visible. It is worth spending a moment on what the full-body cast actually means in terms of the show's visual language. A full-body cast is not a subtle image. It is a complete covering of a human being from head to toe, a visual that communicates total incapacitation in the most direct possible way. The show chose that image deliberately. It could have had Lois end up with a minor burn or a brief hospital stay. Instead, the image it chose is the most extreme version of the injury available, and then it resolved that image in under 60 seconds of screen time at the end of the episode. The gap between the severity of the image and the speed of the resolution is not an accident. It is the show's way of having it both ways, using the dramatic weight of a serious injury to generate a reaction, and then dissolving that weight before it can settle into something the audience has to actually sit with. Season 4, Episode 10 is called Model Misbehavior. This episode is widely noted as the point where Peter's treatment of Meg changes from incidental and careless to something more directed and consistent. In the earlier seasons, Meg suffers from Peter's behavior the way everyone suffers from Peter's behavior. He does not read her. He does not notice when she is struggling. He says things that land badly without registering that they landed badly. She is caught in the blast radius of his cheerful ignorance and his social blindness the same way everyone around him is. That is level 2 damage, and it is painful, but it is not targeted. Model Misbehavior is the episode where the targeting begins. Lois becomes a model in this episode, and Peter's reaction to Lois's new career drives most of the plot. But in the background of this episode, in the way Peter speaks to Meg and about Meg, something shifts. The carelessness becomes something more pointed. The comments become more specifically aimed. And the show makes a structural decision here that echoes through every subsequent season, which is that Meg is available to be the target of that pointed behavior in a way that the other characters are not. She is the one who absorbs it. She is the one it keeps coming back to. This matters enormously for understanding Level 4 because Meg's situation is the clearest example of what dangerous stupidity looks like when it has a consistent target over a long period of time. The dangerous stupidity at Level 4 is not always dramatic in the way that Lois in a full-body cast is dramatic. Sometimes it is smaller and more sustained. It is the ongoing accumulation of moments where Peter's behavior lands on Meg and causes damage that does not get resolved at the end of the episode, that carries forward, that adds to a weight weight she is already carrying. That slow accumulation of damage is in some ways more disturbing than the single dramatic incident, because a single dramatic incident can be resolved. An ongoing pattern of targeted carelessness does not resolve, it just keeps adding up. The Meg abuse arc, as it is commonly called by fans of the show, begins here in season 4 and runs across the entire subsequent history of Family Guy. The show's treatment of it varies enormously across that run. In some seasons, it is treated as a dark joke with a clear awareness that it is dark. In other seasons, it is treated as simply how things are, with no framing around it at all. But the starting point is season 4, and the starting point is important because it establishes what the dangerous stupidity looks like when it finds a consistent target. What is important to understand about the dangerous stupidity at level 4, and what separates it from the levels that come after, is that it is still rooted in Peter's genuine inability to understand the consequences of his actions. In season 4, when Peter says something damaging to Meg, the show is still largely coding that as Peter being oblivious rather than Peter being cruel. He does not register that he is causing harm. He does not check to see how she is receiving what he is saying. The cheerful ignorance and the social blindness are both still fully active, and they are both contributing to the damage. Peter is not choosing to hurt Meg at level 4 the way he will in later seasons. He is just being Peter in Meg's direction, and being Peter in someone's direction for long enough produces damage whether or not that was ever the intention. Meg's position in the family structure at this point in the show is worth examining because it explains why the dangerous stupidity keeps finding her as its target. Meg is the oldest child. She is at an age where what her parents think of her matters enormously to how she feels about herself. She is also, within the show's social world, already struggling. She has difficulty fitting in at school. She does not have a strong social circle. She is in a position where support from her parents would matter more than it might for a child who was doing better in other areas of her life. Peter's dangerous stupidity landing on Meg at this specific point in her life, during the years when parental support carries the most weight, is the show placing the damage where it will have the most impact. Whether the show does this with full awareness of what it is doing is a separate question. The structural result is the same. There is a specific scene in Petarded that captures the relationship between Peter's dangerous stupidity and the rest of his family in a very clean way. It is the scene where Peter, having been told by Brian that his test results show he is mentally disabled rather than a genius, asks whether a mentally disabled person would have hired a bulldozer to demolish half their house. Brian says, maybe. Peter says, uh-oh. And then the bulldozer, which Peter has hired and the drunk driver has already started operating, takes out a wall. The timing of the scene is that Peter received the information that made the action obviously stupid approximately 1 second after the action became irreversible. The wall is already coming down. The understanding of why this was a bad idea arrives too late to matter. That timing, information arriving after the action, has already become irreversible, is the defining structural feature of level 4. At levels 1 through 3, the timing is at least theoretically fixable. Peter does not know something, but he could learn it. Peter cannot read a room, but the room can push back. Peter acts on an impulse, but the impulse can sometimes be stopped before the action fully completes. At level 4, the damage arrives before Peter's understanding of the damage is available. The grease is already on Lois before Peter has had a chance to realize what is happening. The wall is already down. The children are already being taken by Child Protective Services. The understanding, such as it is, comes after. This is also the level where the show's relationship with consequences starts to become complicated in a new way. In the early seasons, Family Guy was relatively consistent about showing that Peter's actions had results, and that those results affected the people around him. Petarded does this. Lois ends up in a cast. The children get taken away. These are shown on screen. The show does not pretend they did not happen, but the speed with which everything resolves, Lois walking back and fully recovered, children back home, everything normal, starts to establish a pattern that will become more pronounced in later seasons. The damage is shown. The recovery is almost instantaneous. And the instantaneous recovery trains the audience to not take the damage seriously even when it is genuinely serious. That pattern has a specific effect on how the dangerous stupidity reads over time. When damage gets resolved instantly and repeatedly, it stops reading as damage. It starts reading as a setup and a punchline. The full body cast is the setup. Lois walking and fully recovered is the punchline. And when that structure repeats enough times, the audience stops engaging with the setup as something real and starts engaging with it as part of the joke. This is how Family Guy gradually made its audience comfortable with things they probably should not be comfortable with. Not by hiding the damage, but by resolving it so quickly and so completely that the damage lost its weight. The audience conditioning that happens at level 4 is one of the most significant and least discussed things about Family Guy's long run. Every time the show presents serious damage and then dissolves it instantly, it is training its audience to receive serious damage as comedy. The full body cast teaches the audience that a full body cast is funny. The children being removed by Child Protective Services teaches the audience that children being removed by Child Protective Services is funny, not because those things things are inherently funny, but because the show presents them and immediately resolves them in a comedic frame, and the brain learns from repetition. By the time the later seasons arrive with their heavier and more sustained damage, the audience has already been trained by level 4 to not hold on to what they are seeing long enough for it to land with its full weight. Season 3 contains several episodes that demonstrate level 4 operating in ways that do not involve Lois or Meg specifically, but show how the dangerous stupidity affects the broader world Peter moves through. In various Season 3 episodes, Peter's impulsive decisions put his friends in danger, damage property across Quahog, and create situations that affect people who never consented to be in Peter's orbit. The fish-out-of-water desert island situation, already covered in level 3, is a good example of this because it is not just Peter who gets stranded. Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe are all on that boat. They all end up stranded. Their lives are disrupted by Peter's impulsive chain, and the dangerous stupidity at level 4 is visible in the fact that the stakes of being stranded on a desert island are real stakes. People can die on desert islands. The show does not take that seriously, but the situation contains it. The dangerous stupidity is also visible in a pattern across Season 3 and Season 4 of Peter getting involved in things he has no business being involved in and causing harm in those areas as a result. In Season 3 Episode 8, which is called The Kiss Seen Around the World, Peter gets involved in Meg's love life in ways that are damaging to her. In Season 3 Episode 14, which is Peter Griffin husband, father, brother, Peter's decision to explore his ancestry has consequences for how he relates to people around him that are damaging in ways he does not perceive. The pattern is consistent. Peter enters a situation. His dangerous stupidity fires. Someone around him absorbs the damage. Peter moves on. What starts to become visible at level 4 that was not visible at the earlier levels is the gap between how Peter experiences his own behavior and how the people around him experience it. At levels 1 and 2, that gap exists mostly around awareness. Peter does not know what other people know. Peter cannot read what other people feel. At level 4, the gap becomes about experience itself. Peter experiences his day as a series of thoughts and actions and brief consequences that are quickly resolved. The people around him experience his day as a series of events that happen to them, some of which cause real damage, and which they have to absorb and recover from while Peter has already moved on to the next thought. Lois in a full-body cast is experiencing something. Peter has already moved past the moment that put her there. He has been declared mentally disabled, discovered he can get away with things, gone to a restaurant, attempted to steal a deep fryer, accidentally poured hot grease on his wife, and had his children taken away, all in the time it takes most people to have a normal Tuesday. Each of those things is a major event for the people it happens to. For Peter, it is just the current impulse chain. The experiences are happening in the same physical space. They are happening in completely different realities. There is something worth saying about what Family Guy is doing with this gap between Peter's experience and everyone else's experience. In the early seasons, the show is using that gap as a source of comedy that has a real observation underneath it. The observation is that people who cause harm without awareness of causing it do not experience their own impact. They move through the world at their own speed, acting on their own impulses, and the people they bump into are left to deal with the results. That is a real phenomenon. It happens in real life with real people. The early show is drawing from something true when it builds this dynamic. The problem, which becomes increasingly visible from Season 4 onward, is that the show wants to have two things at once. It wants the damage to be real enough to generate dramatic stakes and emotional weight in an episode, and it also wants the resolution to be fast enough that the damage does not linger in a way that would make the show uncomfortable to watch. It wants Lois in a full-body cast because that is a dramatic and funny image, and it also wants Lois walking in fully recovered 30 seconds later because it does not want the audience to sit with what just happened. Those two things are in tension with each other, and the show resolves that tension by moving fast. Always moving fast. The damage happens. The recovery happens. Peter moves on. Everyone else moves on. The next impulse fires. The transition from level 3 to level 4 is not a sharp line. There is no single episode where the show announces that the stakes have changed. It is a gradual shift in the weight of the consequences that Peter's stupidity produces, and in the degree to which those consequences fall on specific identifiable people rather than on abstract situations. The satellite dish was an abstract situation. Lois in a full-body cast is a specific person in a specific condition that her husband's stupidity directly caused. That shift from abstract to specific is what level 4 is about, and it is what makes it feel different in the watching, even when the show is treating it with the same comedic lightness it brings to everything else. Level 4 also sets up something that becomes central to the essay's larger argument. The dangerous stupidity at this level is still rooted in the earlier levels. The cheerful ignorance, the social blindness, and the impulsive engine are all still active and all still contributing. Nothing has been added to Peter at level 4. Nothing new has arrived. The same mechanisms that produced funny and relatively harmless chaos in the early seasons are producing something heavier and more damaging damaging as the situations get more serious and the targets become more specific. The stupidity has not changed. The world it is operating in has gotten more real. Level 4 is dangerous in a specific way because it still feels like the earlier levels from the inside. Peter is not doing anything differently at level 4 than he was doing at level 1. The cheerful ignorance is the same cheerful ignorance. The impulse engine fires the same way it always fired. From Peter's perspective, nothing has changed. The difference is entirely in what the world does with what Peter is being. And the world, at level 4, has run out of cushion. The satellite dish had cushion. The unemployment money had cushion. Lois in a full-body cast does not have cushion. The damage is direct. The person absorbing it is specific, and the show's decision to resolve it quickly does not change what it was before the resolution arrived. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Level 5 is where something genuinely new enters the picture. The first 4 levels are all variations of the same basic theme, which is Peter moving through the world without adequate awareness of his own impact. Level 5 introduces something that operates differently from all of them: a belief. A specific and deeply held belief about who Peter is and what he deserves, and the specific kind of damage that belief produces when the world refuses to confirm it. Level 5. The delusional stupidity. The genius who failed the genius test. Every level of Peter's stupidity covered so far has been about something missing. Level 1 is missing information. Level 2 is missing social awareness. Level 3 is missing the pause between thought and action. Level 4 is missing the ability to see the damage before it happens. All 4 of those levels are built on absence. Something that should be there is not there, and the gap that absence creates is where the trouble lives. Level 5 is different. Level 5 is not about something missing. Level 5 is about something present that should not be there. A belief. A specific, detailed, completely wrong belief that Peter carries about himself with total confidence. The belief is that he is smarter than he is, more capable than he is, more talented than he is, more deserving of recognition than the world has so far given him. This belief does not waver in the face of evidence. This belief does not update when reality pushes back. This belief sits at the center of Peter Griffin's self-image like a load-bearing wall, and everything he does in level 5 is in some way an attempt to protect it or prove it or have other people confirm it. The delusional stupidity is a different kind of problem from the first 4 levels because it is active in a way they are not. The cheerful ignorance is passive. It just sits there. The social blindness is passive. It just fails to register things. The impulsive engine fires without thinking, but it does not have a goal. The dangerous stupidity causes harm, but not on purpose. The delusional stupidity has a goal. The goal is to be seen as capable, to be recognized, to win. And in pursuit of that goal, Peter makes decisions and takes actions that are driven not by carelessness or obliviousness, but by a genuine and deeply held belief in a version of himself that does not match the available evidence. What makes level 5 particularly interesting to sit with is that it is the first level where Peter is not just reacting to the world. In the earlier levels, Peter moves through situations, and the situations produce consequences, and Peter absorbs those consequences or misses them entirely depending on which level is most active at that moment. At level 5, Peter is not just moving through situations. He is moving towards something. He wants confirmation. He wants to be told he is special. That want drives his behavior in a way that the earlier levels do not. The cheerful ignorance does not want anything. The social blindness does not want anything. The impulsive engine wants whatever just occurred to it in this moment, which is different from having a sustained underlying goal. The delusional stupidity is the first level with an agenda. Season 4, Episode 6, Petarded, is the most important episode in the show's entire run for understanding level 5. Not because it is the funniest or the most well-constructed, though it is genuinely very good, but because it documents the delusional stupidity with more precision and more honesty than any other episode before or after it. The episode was written by Alex Sulkin and Wellesley Wild, directed by Seth Kearsley, and it originally aired on June 19, 2005. The idea for the episode came from Seth MacFarlane himself. It is, in terms of what it reveals about Peter Griffin as a character, possibly the most important 22 minutes the show ever produced. The episode begins at a game night with the neighbors. The Griffins are playing Trivial Pursuit with Quagmire, Cleveland, Joe, and their partners. Lois, watching Peter struggle throughout the game, quietly swaps Peter's question cards for cards from the preschool edition of the game. Peter does not notice the swap. He starts getting questions right. Simple questions. Questions designed for very young children, but Peter does not know they are simple because he does not know they came from the preschool deck. He gets them all right. He wins the game. The effect on Peter is immediate and total. He becomes insufferable. He talks down to everyone at the table. He makes comments about his own intelligence that are condescending and completely unearned. He walks around the house in the days that follow with the specific energy of a man who has finally been confirmed in what he always suspected about himself. Brian, unable to tolerate Peter's new attitude, challenges him to take the MacArthur Fellows Program test. The MacArthur Fellows Program is a a real program that awards grants to genuinely talented and creative people. The test Brian is referring to is used to assess intellectual ability. Brian's expectation is that Peter will take the test, do poorly, and be forced to confront the reality of his situation. Peter agrees immediately. Of course he agrees. The delusional stupidity requires confirmation, and Peter is so certain of his own genius at this point that taking the test feels like a formality. He is not nervous. He is not uncertain. He walks into the test with the confidence of a man who already knows the outcome and is simply fulfilling the paperwork. The confidence is not performed. It is not bravado covering up doubt. Peter genuinely believes he is going to do well on this test because Peter genuinely believes he is a genius, and a genius doing a genius test is a formality. That belief is the delusional stupidity operating at full capacity, and it is about to meet the hardest available wall. The results come back. Peter is not a genius. Peter is not average. Peter is not even slightly below average. Peter's IQ score places him just below the threshold for mental retardation, which is the clinical term the show uses directly in 2005, without softening it. The doctor who delivers the results shows Peter a graph. The graph shows different levels of intelligence. At the top is average intelligence. Below that is a section labeled retarded. Peter's name is in that section, below the line. Below Peter's name, at the very bottom of the graph, is a section labeled creationists. The joke is mean and specific, and tells you something about where the writers were aiming. But the important part of the graph is where Peter's name is. Below the line, officially, documented, confirmed by a test. The graph itself is worth looking at as a piece of visual comedy that also functions as a precise statement of the show's position on Peter's intelligence at this point in the series. The show could have had the doctor simply tell Peter his score. The show could have had Brian tell Peter his score. Instead, the show chose to present a visual hierarchy, a ranked list of intelligence categories, with Peter's name placed in a specific location within that hierarchy. The visual does something that words alone would not do as effectively. It places Peter, it gives him coordinates, and then it places something below him which tells you that the show knows exactly what it is doing with the joke. The graph is not just delivering information. It is making an argument about where Peter sits in the world. Peter's initial reaction is depression. He sits with the results, he absorbs them. For a brief moment, the delusional stupidity appears to be cracking. The confirmation he was looking for did not arrive. The opposite of what he believed turned out to be true. And there is a version of this episode where that moment of confrontation does something lasting to Peter, where it becomes the starting point for a real reckoning with the gap between his self-image and his reality. That version does not happen. Instead, Peter discovers that being classified as mentally disabled has practical benefits, and the delusional stupidity, rather than being dismantled by the test results, simply reorganizes itself around the new information. Peter does not conclude from the test that he was wrong about himself. Peter concludes from the test that he has a new tool available to him. The belief in his own specialness does not disappear. It relocates. He was not a genius. He is instead a disabled man who cannot be held responsible for his actions. Both of those identities serve the same underlying need, which is to be exempt from the normal rules, to be treated differently from other people, to occupy a category that sets him apart. This reorganization of the delusional stupidity around new information is one of the most revealing things about how Level 5 actually operates. The delusion is not fragile. It does not shatter when the evidence contradicts it. It bends. It adjusts. It finds a new shape that still serves the same purpose. Peter needs to be special. The genius test told him he was not a genius, so he became a different kind of special. The need underneath the delusion is more durable than any specific form the delusion takes. This is the thing about the delusional stupidity that separates it from simple wrongness. Being wrong is fixable. Being wrong and reorganizing every piece of contradicting evidence into new support for the same underlying belief is a different and more durable condition. Season 2, Episode 20, Wasted Talent, contains the most interesting complication of the delusional stupidity in the entire show's run. In this episode, Peter discovers after an extended period of heavy drinking that he is a genuinely skilled piano player when he is drunk. Lois observes him playing and is stunned. She describes it by saying he is like that idiot from Shine, which is a reference to the 1996 film about a pianist with a severe mental condition who is nevertheless a musical genius. The comparison is accurate in its structure. Peter, when sufficiently drunk, can play piano at a high level. He plays recognizable songs. He plays them well. He performs at a piano competition, and the performance is genuinely impressive. This is real. The talent is real. Peter Griffin can play piano. The catch is that he can only access the talent when he is drunk. Sober Peter cannot play. Drunk Peter is a virtuoso. Lois spends the second half of the episode trying to keep Peter at exactly the right level of intoxication to allow him to perform at the competition. Too sober and the talent disappears. Too drunk and he cannot function at all. The episode plays this as a comedy about Lois managing Peter's alcohol intake, but underneath the comedy is something genuinely strange about Peter as a character. The talent talent is in there. It exists. Peter Griffin has a real ability that most people do not have. The delusional stupidity tells him he is special and capable, and in this specific context, that belief is actually correct, except he cannot access the capability without poisoning himself. The talent is real, and the access to it is self-destructive. That combination is not played for the emotional weight it might carry in a different kind of show. Wasted talent plays it for laughs, and the laughs are earned. But the image underneath the laughs, a man who has genuine talent locked behind a condition that requires him to damage himself to reach it, is a specific and interesting image for a show to have produced about its main character. The title of the episode, Wasted Talent, is a direct comment on this. The talent is wasted not because Peter does not have it, but because the only path to it runs through being completely drunk, which means it is functionally unavailable in any sustainable way. The delusional stupidity tells Peter he is talented and capable. The truth is more complicated. He has capability in one very specific area that he cannot reliably access without serious consequences. That is a long way from the broad genius he believed himself to be after winning the preschool Trivial Pursuit game. But it is also not nothing, which makes it one of the most genuinely complicated things the show ever did with Peter's character. The piano competition at the end of Wasted Talent is worth looking at closely because of what it shows about how the delusional stupidity interacts with genuine capability when both are present at the same time. Peter performs at the competition drunk enough to access the talent. He plays well, the audience responds, and Peter, receiving the positive response, is fully in the delusional stupidity's comfort zone. This is what he always believed was in there. This is the confirmation the delusional stupidity has been looking for. The fact that he had to drink himself to a specific level of intoxication to reach it, the fact that the talent is inaccessible under normal conditions, does not register for Peter because the delusional stupidity does not process those details. It processes the applause. The applause confirms the belief. The method of getting there is irrelevant. The Griffin paradox, as some fans and analysts have called it, is the name for the inconsistency in Peter's demonstrated abilities across the show's run. On one hand, Peter scores below the threshold for mental retardation on an official intelligence test. On the other hand, Peter can sometimes do things that require real skill and ability. He plays piano as a drunk savant. He has survived situations that would kill a normal person. He has occasionally built functional things and executed plans that worked. The show is not consistent about how capable Peter is, because the show is more interested in what the situation requires than in maintaining a fixed level of ability for Peter across all situations. This inconsistency is actually one of the things that makes Level 5 interesting to think about. If Peter were uniformly incapable of everything, the delusional stupidity would just be a man being wrong about himself with no complications. The fact that Peter is sometimes genuinely capable, in specific context under specific conditions, means the delusion is not entirely without foundation. There is something in Peter that is worth believing in. The delusional stupidity is not built on nothing. It is built on a real but partial truth that Peter has generalized into a complete and total belief in his own greatness that the full picture does not support. That partial truth is important because it makes the delusional stupidity sympathetic in a way that pure delusion would not be. Peter does not believe he is a genius with nothing to back it up. He believes he is a genius with some things to back it up and a lot of things that contradict it, and he holds on to the things that support the belief and cannot register the things that undermine it. That is a very human way to operate. Most people do some version of this. Most people hold on to evidence that supports their self-image and process evidence that contradicts it more slowly and with more resistance. Peter just does this at a cartoon level of intensity, holding on to the supporting evidence with everything he has and passing through the contradicting evidence like it is not there. The preschool Trivial Pursuit sequence at the beginning of Petarded is built on this dynamic. Lois gives Peter easy questions. Peter gets them right. Peter concludes he is a genius. The fact that the questions were preschool level is information that is available in the room. It is information that everyone else at the table knows. It is information that Peter does not have because Lois hid it from him, but the broader principle is that Peter took confirming evidence at face value and built a complete and total belief on it without questioning its source or its reliability. The delusional stupidity does not examine its own evidence. It just takes what confirms the belief and runs. The behavior Peter exhibits in the days between winning the Trivial Pursuit game and taking the genius test is worth looking at as its own thing, because it shows what the delusional stupidity looks like when it is fully fed and running without any resistance. Peter is condescending to everyone around him. He talks down to Lois. He dismisses his friends. He carries himself with the specific energy of a man who has been proven right about something he always suspected but could never confirm. That energy is recognizable. Most people have encountered someone in that state. The specific quality of a person who has just received what they believe is definitive confirmation of their own superiority is very particular, and the show captures it accurately. Peter in those scenes is not just arrogant. He is specifically the arrogance of someone who finally has evidence, even though the evidence is false. false. Brian's role in Petarded is worth examining because Brian is the character who most directly challenges the delusional stupidity, and the way the show handles that challenge is revealing. Brian challenges Peter to take the genius test. Brian does this because he is frustrated with Peter's arrogance and wants to deflate it with evidence. Brian is right that the evidence will deflate it. The test results are devastating, but what actually happens is not that the evidence changes Peter's fundamental self-image. The evidence changes the specific form the self-image takes, not the underlying need. Brian wins the argument and loses the war. Peter is no longer claiming to be a genius. Peter is now claiming to be a disabled person who deserves special treatment. The result for the people around Peter is essentially the same. He is still exempt from normal expectations. He is still not held to the same standard as everyone else. The form of the special status changed. The special status itself did not. The scene where Brian delivers the test results to Peter is one of the most remembered scenes in the episode. Brian tells Peter he is not a genius and in fact is mentally retarded. Brian has been waiting to say something like this for a long time. His response is, "Yeah, in your face." He immediately apologizes. He says he is sorry for that. The apology is genuine. Brian knows the results are genuinely bad news. But the flash of satisfaction before the apology is also genuine. There is a long history of Brian watching Peter's delusional stupidity run and having to absorb its effects, and the moment the test results confirm what Brian has known all along produces a reaction that Brian cannot entirely contain. The apology is real, and the satisfaction is real, and both of them exist at the same time. The doctor who delivers the official results to Peter has a moment that is quietly one of the funniest things in the episode. When showing Peter the graph, the doctor explains where Peter falls. Peter, looking at the graph, points out that the doctor has described his position incorrectly. Peter says, "Don't you mean just under the line rather than just over it?" The doctor, who is a professor at the Rhode Island State Office of Mental Health, starts to respond with fury, stops himself, takes a breath, and says he is sorry. Please trust the analysis. The professor nearly called Peter a word that would have been professionally disqualifying. He caught himself. But the catch is visible. Even the person delivering the devastating news almost lost his composure because Peter corrected him on the details of his own diagnosis. That moment is a perfect small example of the delusional stupidity at work. Even in the moment of receiving the most humbling possible news about his own intelligence, Peter's brain is still running the delusional program. He is still finding the part of the situation where he can be right about something. He is still looking for the confirmation. The test has just told him he is below the threshold for mental retardation, and his immediate response is to catch a minor verbal error in the doctor's description. The delusional stupidity does not take the test results as a signal to stop looking for ways to be smart. It takes the test results as a new context in which to keep looking. That is the durability of level 5 in its most concentrated form. Even at the moment of maximum contradiction, the delusional program keeps running. It finds a new angle. It keeps going. The cultural significance of Petarded extends beyond what it does for Peter's character. The episode aired in 2005 and used language and framing that was standard for television comedy at that time. Watching it today, the language lands differently. The word the show uses throughout the episode to describe Peter's condition is a word that has moved significantly in terms of how it is received and understood since 2005. This is worth acknowledging not as a criticism of the episode, but as a piece of context. The episode is a product of its moment. It was made by people operating within the norms of 2005 television. Those norms have changed. The episode itself, looked at as a piece of craft, is one of the most tightly constructed and consistently funny episodes in the show's history. In 2014, IGN included it on a list of the 15 best Family Guy episodes and ranked it first. The Sydney Morning Herald called it a real thigh slapper. The critical reception at the time and since has been consistently strong. What Petarded did to the show beyond its own episode is the thing that matters most for this essay. The episode established, officially and canonically, that Peter Griffin has an IQ below 70. That number became the show's internal license. Before Petarded, the writers had to maintain at least a loose connection between Peter's stupidity and the range of behavior that a person of low but not clinical intelligence might plausibly exhibit. After Petarded, that connection was cut. The clinical classification gave the writers permission to take Peter anywhere. Any behavior, no matter how extreme, could now be explained by the diagnosis. The handcuffs came off. And the show, in the seasons that followed, used that freedom extensively. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The delusional stupidity is the pivot point of the whole story. The first 4 levels are about Peter causing damage without knowing it. Level 5 is about Peter being wrong about himself in a way that drives everything he does. Level 6 is what happens when that wrongness stops being something Peter absorbs and starts being something he uses. Level 6, the weaponized stupidity, when not knowing becomes a superpower. There is a moment in Petarded that most people remember as a joke and move past without thinking about it too hard. Peter has just received his test results. He knows he has been classified as mentally mentally disabled. He is driving home, and he accidentally runs over Tom Tucker with his car. Tom Tucker is furious. He gets up, looks through the windshield, sees that it is Peter, the man who was just publicly declared mentally disabled, and his entire demeanor changes. The fury drains out of him. He lets it go. He walks away. Peter watches this happen from the driver's seat. He watches a man who had every reason to be angry at him simply decide not to be, because of the classification. Peter sits with that for a moment, and then something shifts behind his eyes. That shift is level 6. Everything up to this point has been about Peter's stupidity operating as a condition, something Peter has, something Peter lives with, something that produces consequences Peter did not plan and cannot fully understand. The cheerful ignorance, the social blindness, the impulsive engine, the dangerous carelessness, the delusional self-image, all of those levels are things that happen through Peter rather than things Peter does deliberately. He is not running them, they are running him. The damage they produce is real, but it is not intentional. Peter is not trying to get away with things at level 1 through level 5. He is just being Peter, and getting away with things is sometimes a side effect. Level 6 is where Peter notices the side effect and decides to make it the point. The discovery Peter makes in Petarded is specific and important. He discovers that the classification gives him cover. People who would normally hold him accountable for his actions make a different calculation when they factor in the disability. Tom Tucker does not press the issue. Restaurant staff does not press the issue when Peter uses the classification to excuse his behavior. The world, which has been pushing back on Peter with varying degrees of success for 4 seasons, suddenly becomes more permissive, and Peter, whose impulsive engine has been running continuously since the show began, applies that engine to the new information and starts doing whatever occurs to him. He kicks open doors in the women's restroom. He announces to a full restaurant that he is disabled and therefore does not know any better. He uses the phrase in a way that is clearly calculated, even if the calculation is happening at Peter's level of sophistication, which is not very high. Each time he does something he knows he should not be doing, he leads with the classification. He gets in front of the reaction. He establishes the excuse before the action is even complete. That is a different kind of behavior from anything in the first 5 levels. That is a man using a tool. The weaponized stupidity is the most structurally interesting level in this essay because it sits at the boundary between the stupidity being something that happens to the world and the stupidity being something Peter does to the world. Most analyses of Peter Griffin do not make this distinction. They treat his stupidity as a uniform thing across the show's run, something that is always passive and always accidental. The reality is more complicated. There is a version of Peter that genuinely does not know what he is doing, and there is a version of Peter that genuinely does know what he is doing and has found a way to use not knowing as a shield for the knowing. Level 6 is about the second version. The Karma Houdini pattern, which is what fans of the show commonly call the phenomenon of Peter committing acts that should have serious consequences and facing none, becomes the dominant structural feature of Family Guy from season 8 onward. Meg points this out directly in a later season episode, saying that most of the things Peter has done should have landed him in jail by now. She is correct. If you catalog Peter's actions across seasons 8 through 14, the list of things that would result in criminal charges for a normal person is very long. Peter commits acts that damage property, harm people, and in some cases endanger lives, and the show consistently finds ways to either not show the consequences or resolve them so quickly they do not register. The stupidity is the mechanism that makes this possible within the show's logic. If Peter does not know what he is doing, then holding him fully accountable feels wrong to the characters around him and to the audience watching. The classification from Petarded established this in clinical terms. Peter's IQ is below 70. The show has a documented basis for treating Peter's behavior as the product of a person who cannot fully understand what he is doing, and that documented basis becomes, across the seasons that follow, the thing that insulates Peter from the full weight of what he does. This is where level 6 becomes genuinely complicated to think about, because the weaponized stupidity operates on 2 levels at once. On one level, Peter is genuinely not fully aware of the consequences of his actions. The cheerful ignorance, the social blindness, all the earlier levels are still running. They have not been replaced by level 6. They are all still present and still contributing. On another level, Peter has learned, in the specific and limited way that Peter learns things, that the not knowing is useful, that the appearance of not knowing, whether genuine or performed, produces a specific result in the people around him. They let things go. They do not push back as hard. They absorb the behavior rather than fighting it. The Meg abuse pattern across seasons 8 through 14 is the clearest and most sustained example of the weaponized stupidity in the show's history. The pattern in the earlier seasons, as covered in level 4, was Peter's carelessness landing on Meg because Meg was in the path of it. The carelessness was not aimed. It was just happening in Meg's direction. By season 8, something has changed. The behavior toward Meg has become more specific, more consistent, more clearly targeted, and the cover for it is the stupidity. Peter does cruel things to Meg, and the show frames them as the product of Peter's inability to understand what he is doing. But the things he does are too specific and too consistent to be entirely explained by genuine unawareness. In season 8 and beyond, Peter regularly says things to Meg that are aimed. He makes comments about her appearance, her social standing, her worth as a person, that land with too much precision to be pure accident. A man who genuinely cannot read social situations does not consistently find the exact thing that will hurt a specific person the most. That requires some awareness of the person and what matters to them. Peter has that awareness when it comes to Meg, at least in the limited and dark way of knowing where the bruise is. The stupidity is still present. The genuinely limited cognitive ability is still there, but it is operating alongside a learned pattern of behavior that has found Meg as its consistent target and keeps returning to her because the weaponized stupidity has established that she will absorb the behavior without the kind of pushback that would make Peter stop. Meg herself addresses this dynamic in a later season episode where she has a conversation with Brian about her role in the family. Brian tells her that she serves a function in the family structure. She absorbs the negative energy that the family produces. Without her as the target, the other family members would turn on each other. Meg understands this and accepts it. She keeps absorbing. The show presents this as a kind of heroic sacrifice, but it is also a description of exactly how the weaponized stupidity works. It found the person who would not fight back effectively, and it keeps going back to that person because the absence of effective resistance means the behavior continues without cost. Brian's role in the context of the weaponized stupidity is important and complicated. Brian is the character who most consistently calls out Peter's behavior across the show's run. He points out when Peter is wrong. He argues for consequences. He says the things that the audience might be thinking when watching Peter do something that should not be happening. But the show consistently undermines Brian when he does this. Brian is made to look pretentious or naive or ineffective when he pushes back on Peter. The show's treatment of Brian's pushback sends a message about the show's own position on Peter's accountability. Brian is right about Peter. The show knows Brian is right about Peter, and the show keeps undermining Brian anyway, which means the show has made a choice to not let the pushback land. That choice is significant because it mirrors the structure of the weaponized stupidity itself. Peter uses his stupidity as a shield against accountability. The show uses its comedic framing as a shield against the same accountability. Both the character and the show are doing the same thing. The damage is real. The cover is the stupidity. Nobody is fully held responsible. The credits roll. The next episode begins. Season 9, Episode 1, which is called And Then There Were Fewer. And various Season 9 and 10 episodes show Peter operating at a level of casual destructiveness that the show treats as normal, but that would be genuinely alarming in any other context. Peter does things that harm property, that put people in danger, that demonstrate a complete disregard for the physical and emotional safety of the people around him. And in each case, the show's framing insulates him from the full weight of what he is doing. The stupidity is always available as an explanation. The classification from Petarded is always in the background as a clinical foundation for why Peter cannot be expected to know better. What the weaponized stupidity reveals, when you look at it carefully, is that there is a difference between not knowing and not caring that the show deliberately blurs. In the early seasons, Peter genuinely does not know. The cheerful ignorance and the social blindness are running at full capacity, and the damage they produce is genuinely unintentional. By season 8 and beyond, the show's own framing makes it increasingly clear that Peter is sometimes aware of what he is doing and simply does not care about the impact. The not knowing and the not caring start to merge. The stupidity becomes the language the show uses to describe both conditions, even though they are fundamentally different things. The episode Hot Shots from season 15 contains a moment that sits right at the center of this distinction. Brian confronts Peter about something Peter has done, listing several things Peter has done that were worse. Peter interrupts Brian and dismisses what Brian is saying. He acts as though the criticism is not important and moves on. Brian's listing of Peter's worse actions is accurate. Peter's dismissal of it is not the behavior of a man who genuinely does not understand what he has done. It is the behavior of a man who understands what he has done and has decided not to engage with the accounting. That is the weaponized stupidity at full operation. The shield is up. The accountability does not get through. The conversation ends on Peter's terms. The giant chicken fights are one of the most beloved recurring elements of Family Guy across the show's entire run, and they belong directly to the weaponized stupidity in a way that is easy to miss. The fights begin in Season 2, Episode 16, which is called Cleveland Live, when a giant chicken named Ernie gives Peter a coupon that turns out to be expired. Peter is furious about the expired coupon. He and the chicken fight. The fight is extended, violent, and completely disproportionate to the original offense. The two of them cause enormous destruction across Quahog. Buildings are damaged. Cars are destroyed. The fight eventually ends, and both Peter and Ernie walk away, and the show moves on as if nothing significant happened. The fights recur throughout the series. Each one is triggered by some new offense from the chicken, real or perceived, and each one produces produces the same enormous disproportionate destruction with the same absence of lasting consequences. What makes the chicken fights a weaponized stupidity moment is that Peter's response to the original offense, an expired coupon, is so completely out of proportion that it can only be explained by the total absence of the judgment that would tell a normal person to let it go. The stupidity here is weaponized in the sense that it produces a level of destructive response that Peter's social limitations make completely available to him. He does not have the internal mechanism that would say this is not worth a city-destroying fight. That mechanism is gone. And in its absence, Peter can bring the full force of his impulsive engine and his physical durability to bear on a dispute about a coupon. The no-consequences structure of the chicken fights is the clearest visual expression of the weaponized stupidity's relationship with accountability. Enormous destruction happens. Quahog survives it. Peter moves on. The world of Family Guy has accommodated itself to Peter in a way that allows this to happen repeatedly without permanent damage to the show's setting or structure. The world bends around Peter's stupidity. It always has, but the chicken fights make this bending visible in a way that other episodes do not, because the scale of the destruction is so large that the absence of consequences is impossible to miss. The Flanderization of Peter across seasons 8 through 14 is the process by which the weaponized stupidity became the dominant mode of his character. Flanderization is a word fans use to describe the process of a character having one trait exaggerated over time until that trait is all the character is. Peter's stupidity was Flanderized in this period in a specific way. The early stupidity, the cheerful ignorance and social blindness of seasons 1 through 3 was multidimensional. It had warmth in it. It had the capacity for Peter to learn something by the end of an episode, even if the learning did not stick. The Flanderized stupidity of the later seasons is flatter and meaner and more consistent. It does not have the warmth. It does not have the capacity for learning. It just operates as a delivery mechanism for behavior that the show wants to present without being accountable for. There is a version of the weaponized stupidity argument that says the show itself is doing what Peter does. Peter uses his stupidity to avoid accountability for his behavior. Family Guy uses its status as an adult cartoon comedy to avoid accountability for what it shows. The show can present Peter doing genuinely harmful things because the framing of comedy, the laugh track equivalent of animation and timing and cutaway gags, creates the same kind of cover for the show that the mental disability classification creates for Peter. The damage is real. The cover is available. Nobody is fully responsible. The episode ends. That parallel between Peter's behavior and the show's behavior is not a coincidence. Seth MacFarlane built a show around a character whose defining feature is getting away with things, and then built the show itself using techniques that allow it to get away with presenting those things. The weaponized stupidity works at the character level and at the show level simultaneously. Understanding level 6 means understanding both. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Level 6 is about Peter discovering that his stupidity can be used as a shield. Level 7 is about what happens after he has been using that shield for so long that the shield and the man become the same thing. Consequences do not just slide off Peter at level 7. They stop arriving at all. Section 7, Level 7, the cosmic stupidity, a man the universe has simply decided to allow. There is a chicken in Quahog, Rhode Island, named Ernie. Ernie is large. Ernie is a giant chicken in the most literal sense, standing roughly the same height as Peter Griffin, and built with the kind of physical mass that makes the fights between them feel like two buildings falling into each other. The first time Peter and Ernie fight, it is because Ernie gave Peter a coupon that turned out to be expired. That is the reason. An expired coupon. Peter saw the coupon, used the coupon, found out the coupon did not work, and responded by getting into a fight with the chicken that destroyed large sections of Quahog, sent both of them through walls and off buildings and across moving traffic, and lasted long enough that by the time it ended, both participants were exhausted and damaged in ways that should have required weeks of recovery. Neither of them needed weeks of recovery. The fight ended. Peter walked away. Ernie walked away. The next time they crossed paths, the whole thing happened again. And the time after that. And the time after that. The fights became one of the most recognized recurring elements in the show's entire run. Fans love them. They are genuinely impressive pieces of animation. Long and elaborate and committed in a way that most animated action sequences are not. But what the chicken fights are actually doing, underneath the spectacle, is demonstrating something about Peter Griffin that no other recurring element in the show communicates as clearly. Peter Griffin exists outside the normal rules of cause and effect. That is level 7. That is the cosmic stupidity. And it is not a metaphor or a critical reading imposed on the show from the outside. It is something the show built directly and deliberately over more than 20 years of episodes, and the chicken fights are the most visible expression of it. A man who gets into a city-destroying physical fight over an expired coupon, survives it completely, and then does it again multiple times across the show's run, is a man the show has decided to place beyond the reach of normal consequences. Not just beyond the reach of legal consequences, which is level 6, beyond the reach of physical consequences, beyond the reach of narrative consequences, beyond the reach of the basic logic that says actions produce results that change things permanently. The first chicken fight appears in Season 2, Episode 16, an episode called Cleveland Live. Peter and Ernie fight for the first time. The fight is extended and destructive. It ends with both of them battered, and the immediate area around them significantly damaged. The show moves on. The second major chicken fight appears in Season 4, Episode 11, called Peter's Got Woods. This fight is longer and more elaborate than the first. It covers more ground, it involves more destruction, it ends the same way. Both parties walk away. The show moves on. The third major chicken fight appears in Season 6, Episode 11, called Peter's Daughter. By this point, the fights have become a known quantity, something the audience expects and anticipates. The third fight is the most elaborate of the three, involving an extended sequence that goes through multiple locations and produces destruction on a scale that in any realistic setting would constitute a major disaster. None of the three fights produce lasting consequences. Ernie is not dead after any of them. Peter is not seriously injured after any of them. Quahog has not been visibly altered by the destruction any of them caused. The world of the show simply absorbs the damage and resets. And the reason this is possible, the reason the show can keep doing this without it feeling wrong or inconsistent, is that by the time the chicken fights become a recurring element, the show has already established something fundamental about how Peter relates to the world around him. The world bends for Peter. It always has. The chicken fights are just the most extreme visual statement of a principle that has been operating since Season 1. To understand how the show arrived at level 7, it helps to trace the path from the earlier levels. In level 1, the world pushed back on Peter gently. Brian corrected him about the Cheerios. Lois caught him spending the unemployment money. The satellite dish was a problem that had to be dealt with. The world was responsive. It registered Peter's actions and produced reactions. In level 2, the world pushed back a little less reliably. People around Peter absorbed his social blindness because the alternative was exhausting. In level 3, the impulse engine started outrunning the world's ability to push back. In level 4, the damage started arriving before the pushback could prevent it. In level 5, the delusion reorganized itself around contradicting evidence rather than updating. In level 6, the stupidity became a shield that made the pushback ineffective. By level 7, the pushback has stopped, not because the world gave up in a single moment, but because 20+ seasons of Peter Griffin absorbing and surviving and continuing without permanent change has produced a version of the show in which the basic premise of consequences applying to Peter has been quietly retired. The show did not announce this retirement. There was no episode where the writers said Peter is now beyond consequences. It happened gradually, level by level, as each layer of stupidity made the world a little less able to hold Peter accountable, until the accumulated weight of all 6 previous levels produced a man for whom accountability is simply not a feature of his existence. Peter's physical indestructibility is one of the clearest expressions of level 7, and it runs through the entire show's history in ways that become more extreme as the seasons progress. In the early seasons, Peter survives things that are improbable. Falls, accidents, impacts that would hurt a normal person do not seem to affect Peter much. This is normal cartoon physics, and most animated shows operate this way to some degree. But Family Guy takes it further and further as the seasons progress. Peter does not just survive things that would hurt a normal person. Peter survives things that should definitively kill a person. He is hit by cars. He falls from significant heights. He is involved in explosions. He is caught in situations that the show presents as survival situations and then walks out of them with nothing more than a moment of breathlessness. The show, in Season 13, Episode 6, called The 2,000-Year-Old Virgin, has Peter engaging in physical activity that results in damage that is played completely straight as comedy, with no lasting physical consequence. Season 14 contains multiple episodes where Peter's body absorbs punishment that the animation renders in specific and detailed ways, making the impact visible and real within the show's visual language, and then the next scene has Peter moving around and functioning normally. The indestructibility is not subtle. The show is not trying to hide it. The show is presenting it as simply how Peter works. He cannot be permanently damaged. He is made of something the show does not name but consistently demonstrates. This physical indestructibility is the body-level expression of level 7. If the cosmic stupidity means that consequences do not apply to Peter, then physical consequences are the most basic category of consequence that needs to not apply. A man who is beyond the reach of cause and effect cannot also be fragile. The indestructibility is the show's way of building the cosmic immunity into Peter's physical existence so that it is visible and consistent at every level of the show's reality. The giant chicken fights make this explicit in a way that is impossible to miss. In Peter's Got Woods, the Season 4 fight, Peter and Ernie go through a sequence that involves falling from a building, going through a car, and ending up in a situation that the animation renders as genuinely brutal. The sounds are specific, the impacts are shown in detail. The show is not not soft-pedaling what is happening to these two bodies. And then the fight ends and Peter walks away. Ernie walks away. The specificity of the damage and the complete absence of lasting consequences sit right next to each other in the same scene, and the show does not acknowledge the contradiction, because within the logic of level 7 there is no contradiction. This is just how things are for Peter Griffin. Things happen to him. He continues. Season 13 episode 1, called The Simpsons Guy, is a crossover episode where the Griffin family meets the Simpson family. The episode is notable for many reasons, but the most relevant one here is the fight between Peter and Homer Simpson. The two of them fight in an extended sequence that is a direct callback to the chicken fights in its structure and length and commitment to showing detailed physical impact. Peter and Homer fight across multiple locations. The fight is long. It is specific about the damage being done, and it ends without permanent consequence to either party. What the Homer fight reveals about level 7 is interesting because Homer Simpson is himself a character with significant physical durability. The Simpsons has its own version of cartoon consequence immunity, but the fight between Peter and Homer, watched carefully, shows two different relationships with physical reality. Homer's durability in The Simpsons is played as a running joke about how tough Homer is despite being a soft middle-aged man. Peter's durability in Family Guy is played as simply a fact about how Peter exists. There is no joke in it by the time The Simpsons Guy airs. It is just what Peter is. The cosmic immunity has been fully established. It does not need to be commented on. It is the ground the show stands on. In 2012, a CNN article about how fathers are portrayed in media quoted real American fathers expressing frustration with the bumbling dad stereotype. The specific quote from one father was that real dads are not Peter Griffin or Homer Simpson. The fact that real people felt the need to make this statement publicly tells you something about what Peter Griffin had become culturally by that point. He had become a reference point, not just a character on a show, but a shorthand for a type. And the type he represented was not just a stupid dad. The type he represented was a man for whom the normal rules do not apply. A man who causes chaos and damage and harm and keeps going. The real fathers who made that statement were not just pushing back on the stupidity, they were pushing back on the immunity, on the idea that a man can be this way and face no permanent cost. That cultural dimension of level 7 is important because it shows that the cosmic stupidity is not just something happening within the show, it is something the show exported into the real world. Peter Griffin became a cultural object, a meme, a reference, a shorthand, and what that reference carries is not just the comedy of his stupidity, but the specific relationship between his stupidity and his immunity. When people quote Peter Griffin in everyday life, when his image appears in online conversations, when his name gets used to describe a type of person, the thing being referenced is almost always level 7. The man who does something completely wrong and walks away from it. The man the universe has decided to allow. The meme culture around Peter Griffin is one of the most interesting pieces of evidence for level 7's cultural reach. The most widely circulated Peter Griffin memes are almost universally about consequence immunity. They show Peter doing something that should produce a bad outcome for him, and then showing that outcome either not arriving or arriving and being completely absorbed. The comedy in those memes is not the comedy of a man being stupid. The comedy is the comedy of a man being stupid and getting away with it. The stupidity without the immunity would not be funny in the same way. The immunity is what makes it a meme rather than just an example of bad behavior. Season 14 onwards sees the show making some adjustments to Peter's character that are worth acknowledging in the context of level 7 because they represent the show trying to reach back toward earlier versions of Peter without fully getting there. Starting around season 14, the most extreme meg abuse begins to dial down. Peter has moments of genuine connection with his children. There are episodes where he does something genuinely caring for a family member, and the caring is played straight rather than undercut. These moments feel different from the level 7 Peter because they introduce something that level 7 had removed, which is the possibility that Peter's actions toward the people he loves might matter to him. Whether those moments represent a genuine shift in the character or just occasional departures from the dominant mode is something the show never fully resolves. The cosmic immunity is still running in season 14 and beyond. The chicken fights continue. The physical indestructibility continues. The consequence-free structure of Peter's relationship with the world continues. The warmer moments exist alongside all of that rather than replacing it. The show did not find its way back to the Peter of seasons 1 through 3. It found a way to occasionally let that Peter surface inside the level 7 Peter, which is a different thing. The most honest way to describe what Family Guy produced across its full run is a character who started as a portrait of a specific kind of human obliviousness and ended as something closer to a force of nature. The 7 levels are the path between those two things. Each level added something to Peter that made him less like a person navigating a world with consequences and more like a phenomenon that the world has stopped trying to navigate around. By level 7, the world of Quahog has fully accommodated itself to Peter. The neighbors have accepted that Peter will annex their pools and destroy their property and be rude to their faces, and walk away without lasting punishment. The town absorbs it, the family absorbs it, the show absorbs it, the audience absorbs it. What is left at level 7, after all 6 previous levels have stacked and the cosmic immunity has settled in, is something that is genuinely strange to think about. Peter Griffin is not a villain. The show has never coded him as a villain despite the damage he causes. He is the main character. The audience spends time with him every episode. The show is named after him. He is, in some fundamental sense, the person the audience is supposed to be watching and following, and in some cases identifying with. And yet by level 7, he is a person for whom the normal rules of cause and effect have been suspended by the universe he lives in. That combination, main character, audience identification figure, and person for whom consequences do not apply, is not an accident. It is the end result of 20+ seasons of a show making specific choices about what kind of character Peter would be and what kind of world would be built around him. Family Guy chose, season by season and level by level, to build a world that could contain Peter, and containing Peter required a world that had given up on holding him accountable. The cosmic stupidity is not just about Peter, it is about the show that made him, and kept making him, and kept finding new ways to place him beyond the reach of consequence. 7 levels deep, across more than 25 years of television, Peter Griffin remains exactly what he was in Season 1, Episode 1. A man walking through life with complete confidence in a version of himself and his surroundings that does not match reality. The cheerful ignorance is still running. All 6 layers that built on top of it are still running. The only thing that has changed is that by level 7, the world has stopped correcting him. The world has stopped expecting him to update. The world has accepted that Peter Griffin is going to be exactly this way forever, and it has built itself around that acceptance. 7 levels, 1 man, and a universe that decided, somewhere around Season 4, that it was easier to just let him keep going. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 7 levels told the story of how Peter got here. The conclusion is where the full picture comes into focus, where all 7 layers are visible at once, and where the question of what that picture actually means gets its answer. Conclusion: 7 levels deep, and what we found there. Peter Griffin has been on television since January 31st, 1999. That first episode aired immediately after Super Bowl 63, which means the largest possible television audience in America at that moment was the first group of people to meet him. They met a man who had just gotten fired for showing up to work drunk, who had filed for unemployment in a way that accidentally produced $6,000 a week in benefits, and who had spent all of it on chicken fajitas before his wife found out. That was the introduction. A large man in green pants who did not understand what he had done wrong and was, despite everything, in a pretty good mood about how things were going. 25 years later, that man is still on television, still in the green pants, still in the same house on Spooner Street in Quahog, Rhode Island, still married to Lois, still friends with Quagmire and Cleveland and Joe, still drinking Pawtucket Patriot Ale at the Drunken Clam, still getting into fights with a giant chicken over an expired coupon. The external details of Peter Griffin's life have barely changed across a quarter century of television. What has changed is everything underneath those details. The kind of stupidity Peter represents, the weight it carries, the relationship between that stupidity and the world that keeps absorbing it. That change is what this essay has been about. Not the surface of Peter Griffin, which is consistent and recognizable and has been referenced across 2.5 decades of internet culture. The layers underneath the surface, the 7 distinct levels that stack on top of each other and together produce the specific, complicated, sometimes funny and sometimes genuinely troubling thing that Peter Griffin became over the course of Family Guy's run. Level 1 was the cheerful ignorance, the man who does not know what he does not know. This level is warm, it has genuine affection in it. The early show built its entire audience on this version of Peter because there is something genuinely funny and oddly comfortable about a person who moves through life with that level of confidence in a reality that does not match the observable facts. The Cheerios scene, the satellite dish, the unemployment fajitas, a man reporting his experience of the world with total authority and zero accuracy, and being completely fine with how things are going. Level 2 was the social stupidity, the man with no filter and no awareness that filters exist, the Family Feud podium, the women's retreat that changed nothing, the specific kind of obliviousness that is always pointed outward and always making contact with people who did not ask to be in its path. Seth MacFarlane built this level from observation, from real New England men who spoke without filters, and in the early seasons that observation gave the comedy something true underneath it. Level 3 was the impulsive stupidity, the near total absence of any gap between thought and action, Pretoria declared in an afternoon. A desert island reached through a chain of unexamined decisions. A bulldozer hired 45 seconds after receiving test results. The impulse engine running continuously with no break available. This level is where Family Guy discovered what Peter was as a narrative tool. Hand him a starting condition and the impulsive engine generates story automatically. Every thought becomes an action. Every action becomes a consequence. consequence. The consequence becomes the next thought. Level 4 was the dangerous stupidity. The point where the damage stopped being abstract and started landing on specific people. Lois in a full-body cast. The children removed by Child Protective Services. The Meg abuse arc beginning in Season 4, Episode 10, and running forward through the rest of the show's history. This level is where the cushion between Peter's stupidity and real harm got removed, and where the show's habit of resolving damage instantly began training its audience to not take that damage seriously, even when the underlying situation was genuinely serious. Level 5 was the delusional stupidity, the preschool Trivial Pursuit cards, the MacArthur Fellows test, the IQ graph with Peter's name below the retardation line and creationist below that, the piano talent that only works when Peter is drunk, the Griffin paradox of a man who scores below 70 on an IQ test and also occasionally demonstrates real capability in specific contexts. This level revealed that Peter's stupidity is not just about missing information or missing awareness. It is also about a self-image that does not update when reality contradicts it, that bends around contradicting evidence rather than breaking, that finds a new shape to hold the same underlying need every time the old shape stops working. Level 6 was the weaponized stupidity. Tom Tucker walking away from a car accident because the driver was the disabled man. The Karma Houdini pattern across seasons 8 through 14. The Meg abuse operating behind the cover of the stupidity classification. Brian calling things out and the show undermining Brian for doing it. The distinction between not knowing and not caring getting deliberately blurred until the two things became indistinguishable within the show's framing. This level is where the stupidity stopped being a condition Peter lived with and started being a tool Peter used, whether consciously or through the accumulated habit of a man who has learned that not knowing is useful. Level 7 was the cosmic stupidity, the chicken fights, the physical indestructibility, the city-destroying battles over expire coupons that end with both parties walking away. The world of Quahog fully accommodated to Peter's existence in a way that required consequence to stop applying to him at any meaningful level. Real fathers in a 2012 CNN article, feeling the need to state publicly that they were not Peter Griffin. A character becoming a cultural shorthand, not just for stupidity, but for the specific combination of stupidity and immunity that Level 7 represents. 7 levels. And what sits underneath all 7 of them, what connects the man in the pilot to the man in Season 22, is something simpler than any individual level. Peter Griffin is a portrait of what happens when a specific kind of person, a person with genuine limitations and genuine blind spots and genuine inability to read the world around him, is never permanently held accountable for any of it. The early seasons found that portrait funny and warm and occasionally sharp in its observation of real human behavior. The later seasons found it useful as a delivery mechanism for shock comedy that the stupidity classification could always excuse. Both of those things are true at the same time, across the same 25 years, in the same green pants. The show that started as a portrait of cheerful obliviousness became, level by level, something that required the universe itself to bend around its main character. Peter did not change. The world around him changed. It got more accommodating. It got more permissive. It stopped expecting him to update. And in that accommodation, in that slow lowering of what the world was willing to demand from Peter Griffin, the show produced something that is genuinely worth thinking about beyond the laughs. Because the question underneath all 7 levels is not really about Peter. Peter is a cartoon character in green pants who cannot tell Cheerios from alphabets. The question is about what it means that a show built around that character ran for over 25 years and became one of the most watched animated series in television history. What does it mean that audiences kept coming back to a man whose stupidity caused real damage to the people around him and who faced no permanent cost for any of it? What does it say about the culture that made Family Guy and the culture that watched it that the answer to every level of Peter's stupidity was, ultimately, to keep watching? The cheerful ignorance is still running. It was always running. And somewhere in Quahog, Rhode Island, Peter Griffin is looking at a bowl of Cheerios and seeing a message that was never there, completely unbothered, completely certain, moving on to whatever comes next. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.